Thank you for your time today to hear our presentation on the Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act 2019 that came into enactment on the 1st of April 2024. This bite-sized recording is the second part of two recordings we have completed specifically for the children and young people sector. My name is Melissa Cook and I am a Safe Staffing Advisor with the Safe Staffing Programme at the Care Inspectorate. As I said in my first recording, the Safe Staffing Programme was commissioned by the Scottish Government to support care services to prepare for the introduction of the new legislation. This is the first legislation in the UK to set out requirements for both health and care services. In this second recording, I will be covering the statutory guidance that accompanies the Act, Part 3 of the Act, along with other useful information for your service. Just to recap, we reviewed the four parts of the Act in our last recording and concentrated on Part 1, and as stated, it is Part 3 of the Act we will be focusing on with you now. Before we move on to introduce Part 3, we'd like to highlight the statutory guidance that accompanies the Act. This has been developed by the Scottish Ministers to provide practical information to support organisations in meeting the requirements placed on them by the Act. This statutory guidance can be found online. Again, there are links to this on our hub page. It is quite a lengthy document, so some of the information on our hub pages helps you to navigate to the sections you may want to review. The statutory guidance provides further descriptors of the 8 guiding principles that we reviewed in our first bite-sized video. It also provides clarification on some terminology used within the Act, such as the example you can see on screen. Safe in the context of Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act does not mean no risk, and it may not even mean low risk. We also find it beneficial for services to highlight that the statutory guidance also refers to the staff the Act applies to. So this includes, for example, employees of the care service, agency and other temporary and contract workers, self-employed workers, those on an apprenticeship scheme or other earn-as-you-learn scheme, and all volunteers. Part 3 of the Act places a duty on care service providers to ensure appropriate staffing. The legislation that covered staffing prior to the Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act coming into enactment on the 1st of April 2024 was Regulation 15 of the Scottish Statutory Instruments, and it's the small paragraph that you can see on the screen. It detailed how providers must have regards to the size and nature of the care service when arranging their staffing, and ensuring that there were at all times suitably qualified persons working in the service. The requirements within Regulation 15 are all very much still present in the new Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act. However, in the new Act they go into more detail, and that's because there's a focus on the recognition that high-quality staff provide high-quality services. Now the Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act has come into enactment, Regulation 15 from the Scottish Statutory Instruments has been revoked. There have been many questions put to us in the Safe Staffing team, and one of these has been about the other statutory instruments. We continue to make all services aware it is only Regulation 15 in the Scottish Statutory Instruments that has been revoked. All other regulations are still in place. Again, just to make you aware, we have a full Q&A section on our hub pages. This comparison slide demonstrates the similarities between the new Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act 2019 on the left and the revoked Regulation 15 from the Scottish Statutory Instruments on the right. The Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act states that organisations still need to fully consider how many staff you need to provide your service. It is important to note that the new legislation does not impose specific staffing levels for children and young people's services. However, it does detail how you should determine what constitutes appropriate staffing levels by considering the nature of the care service, the kind of service provided, the size of the care service, your aims and objectives, the number of people experiencing care, and the needs of those service users. The similarities between the new legislation and the previous revoked wording of Regulation 15 are evident. The wording is a little different, but in general the ask of the new legislation does not differ that much from Regulation 15, with the exception of the well-being of staff. And that is because this is being brought into legislation like this for the first time. But it is important to remember it is the well-being of staff insofar as it affects the outcomes for children and young people, and I go into more detail about this in our first recording. Part 3 of the Act also details the training of staff and the responsibilities on providers to ensure staff are appropriately trained to carry out their duties. Prior to the Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act coming into enactment, to fulfil the regulatory criteria set in Regulation 15, our Children and Young People's inspectors were asking providers during inspection about induction plans, supervisions and appraisal systems. And this is just one way that organisations can demonstrate how they assess, how they monitor and plan the appropriate training needs for their individual staff. The training of staff stated in the new Act is no different. It is about staff receiving appropriate training for the work they are to perform, and staff being assisted to ensure that their professional learning is current. That was our brief overview of Part 3 of the Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act 2019 in relation to children and young people's services. Before we end this bite-sized recording, we do like to direct services and staff to our hub page on the Care Inspectorate website. Here you can find a plethora of information on the new Act. The 3 images you can see in front of you are the 3 posters created for the 3 different sectors: adults, children and young people, and ELC. Not only can you download these to use in your own services, if you click on them you will find information specific to each sector as well. Finally, you can see our contact details on the slide. We do have a mailing list that we highly recommend you sign up to if you aren't already, and we have our own specific email address. If you have any questions or comments, please get in touch. Thank you for listening.